Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carolee Makes Cards. I have 5 cards featuring Simon Says Stamps Home Sweet Home from the July card kit. The first card is a slimline card. I began with some ink blending using MFT's Hillside Stencil. The bottom half of the card has been ink blended with Distress Oxide inks, Iced Spruce, and Bundled Sage. I have stenciled 4 hillsides to serve as a background for the groupings of buildings that will be staggered on the card. To finish up the background, I switched to My Favorite Things Cloud Stencil and use Stormy Sky and milled Lavender Distress Oxide inks. This panel has been die cut from Bristol Smooth cardstock from Pinkfresh Studios Slim Stitched Rectangle dies. I'm using the plain largest die. The building scape from this set is one long stamp. I masked off sections of the stamp to create my groupings. The sentiment, "Home is where the Wi-Fi automatically connects," was stamped with Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink, as were the buildings. This ink is very versatile and can be used with any medium, including Copic markers. The stamping was finished up with a few groupings of birds using an acrylic block. I won't be showing any of the coloring as I had some difficulties with the clip. I chose Copic colors that were muted like the background in blue violets, grays, and gray greens. Because the images were small, I worked mainly with just a light and a darker tone. The panel was adhered to blue-violet cardstock that was die cut from Pinkfresh Studios Slim Stitched Rectangle die set. The card base measures 4 by 9 inches and was made from Nina Classic Crest 110-pound cardstock. Nuvo crystal glaze was added to the windows and the heart. A few embellishments were added using Nuvo Crystal Drops Soft Mint and Dream Drops Indigo Eclipse. My second card combines Home Sweet Home with Simon Says Stamps Daisy Bouquet Stencil. I began this card by creating an ink-blended background using Tailored Expressions, masking rectangles using Candied Apple, Seedless Preserves, and Milled Lavender. I used the outer portion of the rectangular stencil to help line up the rectangle stencil. The stencil was held in place with Pixie Spray, a temporary adhesive. I wanted a dark border, and so quite a bit of pressure was applied during the ink blending. The ink blended area was masked off using the outer stencil and held in place with a little bit of Post-it tape. The exposed area was ink blended with the very same colors but with light pressure to create some variation between the border and the interior of the card. Leaving the stencil in place, Simon Says Stamps Daisy Bouquet Stencil was positioned in the lower right-hand corner. Russian white Nuvo Crackle mousse was applied. The panel was set aside to dry completely before proceeding to the next step. After the stamp was positioned, a bit of Post-it tape was used so that just one of the buildings would be inked with Versamark. The Post-it tape was removed before stamping. The image was embossed in white. The sentiment, "Home Sweet Home," was also embossed in white 3 times, giving it a nice, puffy, dimensional appearance. The image was colored with a little bit of purple and red zig markers just to add a bit more contrast from the background. The panel was adhered to an A2 card base and finished off with some clear sequins topped up with Crystal Nuvo Drops Morning Dew. My third card is a nighttime scene in a slimline format. I began with a panel of Bristol Smooth cardstock die cut from Pinkfresh Studios Slim Stitched Rectangles. The panel was masked off using the full width of the Post-it tape around the perimeter, leaving a long, narrow rectangle. This area was ink blended with Distress Oxide inks, Black Soot, Pine Needles, Wilted Violet, and Shaded Lilac. Using my large Misty, the townscape was stamped with Simon Says Stamps Intense Black ink. To create silhouettes, all of the images were colored with black Sharpie felt pen. I did leave a couple of the windows uncolored. Because gouache is an opaque watercolor, I chose it to color in the window panes yellow. It had fairly good coverage over the ink blended background. I touched up some of the lines between the panes of glass with a Foodball 1.5 gel pen by Ranger Ink. Using a water brush pen and the ink used in the background, I touched up one of the trees that extended beyond the ink blended background. The sentiment was stamped with Intense Black ink. Simon Says Stamps Blue Violet cardstock was die cut using the largest of Pinkfresh Studios slim stitched rectangle dies. It was adhered to a card base that measured 4 by 9 inches. The main panel was adhered to the blue violet cardstock. Using an acrylic block, a few stars were stamped in the horizon. They were colored in with a Copic marker Y15 and then given a sparkly appearance using Nuvo Glitter Drops White Blizzard. To finish the card, Nuvo Crystal Glaze was used to cover the lighted windows and the top of the lampposts. My next card features another night scene in an A2 sized format. Using Tailored Expressions masking oval stencils, I ink blended a background using Distress Oxide inks, Black Soot, Peacock Feathers, and Chip Sapphire. The etched lines on the stencil ensure that the panel is in place so that the oval is perfectly centered. Before removing the stencil, I overlay Simon Says Stamps Snow Stencil and apply Gina K's Glitz Glitter Gel to the top half of the oval. When the gel is completely dry, which does not take very long, I then stamp my sentiments and my image using Simon Says Stamps Intense Black ink. I choose this Copic friendly ink because I do have just a little bit of coloring to do. I use Copic markers BG 72 and 75 to color the banner, and the airplane is colored with C6, 8, and 10. The panel is adhered to soft navy cardstock cut just shy of an A2 size. The card base is constructed from Neenah Solar White Classic Crest 110 pound cardstock. It is A2 size, measuring 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. I apply Nuvo Crystal Glaze to the banner to help it pop from the background. The card is finished up with a few embellishments using Nuvo Crystal Drops Caribbean Ocean, or perhaps you pronounce it Caribbean. And now for my final card featuring the paper airplane. I began with an A2 size Bristol Smooth cardstock panel. Using Tailored Expressions masking circles, the panel was lined up using the etched lines at the back of the stencil. The circle was ink blended with Distress Oxide inks, Tattered Rose, and Worn Lipstick. Using a little bit of pixie spray, I cover the ink blended circle using the circle cutout stencil that comes with the Tailored Expressions set. Simon Says Stamps Wave stencil is overlaid and held in place with some Post-it note tape. I apply Russian White Nuvo Crackle Mousse to the panel. I try to ensure that I'm getting a nice, even, smooth layer. The images that I'm using for this card are stamped on a separate piece of cardstock. Both the banner and the paper airplane are colored with R30 and RV32 and 34. Some very quick coloring followed by some very quick fussy cutting. The stencil panel is adhered to cotton candy cardstock and then to an A2 sized card base. Foam squares are cut down into strips to adhere both the banner and the paper airplane to the panel. 3 hearts are stamped and colored with the same markers used previously. Dot detail was added to the ink blended area using white Nuvo crystal drops. The card was finished up with Nuvo crystal glaze on the hearts. And that wraps up this video with 5 cards featuring Simon Says Stamps Home Sweet Home from the July card kit. In case you are interested, this stamp set can be purchased separately from the card kit. This video is coming a lot later than I would want it to. These days, international shipping is truly snail mail. Better late than never. It's such a great stamp set, I just thought I would go for it. As always, your visit is appreciated.